and welcome, friends. Let me just, there we go. Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm Amy Antonucci, New Hampshire Peace Action Board member. I'm really glad to welcome you to our Peace and Justice Conversation series online on Monday, October 6th, 2025, 1 week out from Indigenous Peoples Day. Our topic tonight is Dismantling Colonialism and Militarism. And our speaker is Sarah Augustine, and I'll tell you a little more about her in a minute. But first, we would like to pause and take a moment to acknowledge that we do our work here in New Hampshire on the traditional ancestral homelands of the Abenaki, Wabanaki, and Pennacook peoples, past and present. And we honor with gratitude the land, the water, and those people who have been in relationship throughout many, many generations. Quick reminder on our Zoom guidelines. We love when you keep your video on, but we will have everyone's audio muted to start with. You can use the chat for questions, and later we'll have a mix of using the chat and hand raising, and I'll call on people. But we first will have Sarah speaking. So let me introduce Sarah to you. So Sarah Augustine, who is a Pueblo or Tewa descendant, is co-founder and executive director of the Coalition to Dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery. She has represented the interests of Indigenous community partners to their own governments, to the Inter-American Development Bank, the UN, the World Health Organization, and a host of other international actors. She's a columnist for Anabaptist World. She has written 2 books, and she co-hosts the Dismantling the Doctrine of Discovery podcast. She has taught at Heritage University, Central Washington University, and Goshen College. In Washington State, where she lives, she serves in a leadership role on multiple boards and commissions with the intent of, and with actually doing, enabling vulnerable peoples to speak for themselves in advocating for structural change. Tonight, she's going to be continuing this conversation that we've been having with previous speakers as well on nonviolence and on Indigenous rights, helping us to understand the deep roots of settler colonialism and militarism in the Americas and beyond, and identify ways that we can dismantle these structures of oppression. So please join me in a very visible welcome to Sarah, who we're so pleased to have with us. Welcome.
What a pleasure it is to be here with you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this time and space together. I wonder if you'd be willing to begin our time together, if you'd be willing, wherever you are, to plant both of your feet on the ground, and maybe close your eyes if you're willing, or put a soft focus on the ground right in front of you. And what I want to do is just breathe together. Just take a deep breath in and hold it and blow it out. Take another deep breath in and hold it and blow it out. And another deep breath in. And hold it and blow it out. I want to just take this opportunity to get us into alignment and to breathe together. So the way I've been taught by my elders in our tradition, breath is sacred. In talking with you about nonviolence, I want to really root this in cosmology, an understanding of cosmology. So what is cosmology anyway? Indigenous cosmology? Well, in the way that I grew up here in the United States, the idea is that the things that we can measure with our senses, those things, we call that empiricism, right? If we can measure it, if we can replicate it, that's the scientific method. Are you familiar with that? Yeah. And then there's another way of knowing, which is theology, right? The exploration of the divine. And so we say, well, we sort of put that in another box and say that's a different way of knowing. Cosmology is really, from my point of view, the merger of these two things. This understanding that what we experience in the natural world, those things we can measure with our senses, is the same as the experience of the divine. So that's cosmology, right? The exploration of the cosmos. So I really want to start there in talking about nonviolence, and stick with me. I'm gonna set the stage with some basic values and some things that I understand that I've learned in my teaching, and then see if we can get to the place, the sort of grounding of nonviolence. So what I have understood reality to be, what I've learned from my elders, is that our reality is that we live in a closed system of mutual dependence. I'm going to say that again. We live in a closed system of mutual dependence. Well, what's a closed system? It's a system where there's nothing new in and nothing can go out. So in this earth, that is a closed system. So if we create toxic waste, whatever kind of pollution we create, it stays here with us, right? There's nowhere for it to go. It stays here. And there's no new, there are no new elements. We have the same, think about this, we have the same water that's been here from the very beginning. There's no new water. The water we have is the water we have. And so in this closed system, we have life support systems on this earth that are self-correct, or they're self-replenishing, right? So our water system, for example, it is a cycle. It cycles to replenish itself. So we have evaporation, we have, and that goes up and forms cloud patterns and weather patterns, and so on. And so the same rain that falls on us today is the water that's been here from the start. And so when you think about that, I'm drinking a glass of water right now, a bottle of water. I wonder how many times those water molecules have passed through a bird. Probably a lot of times, right? So the closed system, there's nothing new. We don't get new air, and we don't get new soil. So of course, soil is being made all the time. It's being replenished all the time, and we are embedded in the system of mutuality. That is to say, there are these life support systems, are a lot of different creatures and actors working together to make this happen. So for example, what I would call the insect people, they're often, sort of the trash workers of the world. You know what I mean? So they take trash and they break it down so that it can become soil. And we have animals that do that job as well. And in terms of oxygen that we are dependent on to survive, human beings are dependent on to survive, we know that we're dependent on trees to help create that for us. So we are in this web of mutuality. So if we take that for granted, that we live in a closed system of mutual dependence, interdependence, then I know that everything I do matters. Everything I do has an impact on the life around me, right? And I'm not the center. I'm not the center, okay? So I'm part of the system of life, and I'm impacting that system with my behavior, and I'm not the center of it. What happens isn't about me, right? It's about these systems that have been here since the beginning of time. They've been here since the beginning of Earth, and they'll be here long after I'm gone. So I'm here for a little while, and I'm participating in these systems of life. Okay, so that is at odds with what I learned in my 20th century and 21st century, well, I should say my 20th century upbringing in the United States, where I learned that it's a dog-eat-dog world, and it's my job to do my best to take care of myself and my kin and that I'm in competition with everybody else. And I remember teachers telling me, well, you have to do what you have to do to get ahead. So you think about, who are you getting ahead of? You know, look to your left, look to your right on your screen. Those are the people you're getting ahead of, right? Your relatives are the people you're trying to get ahead of in an indigenous cosmology or in our cosmology. Okay, so I want to put forward the idea that colonialism, and we're going to get to this in a little later, but colonialism as a system of thought is about extraction. So it is denying the lifeness, commodifying the lifeness of living systems and beings. That is both human beings, animals, the land itself, for the purpose of extracting resources for personal gain. Okay, so this system of thought, this idea of extraction as a worldview, it's the basis of capitalism. Capitalism, which is a system designed to generate profit for individuals, is sort of the root and the grounding for violence as we understand it in the 20th and 21st century. So this idea of extraction justified is the basis of violence and violent systems at play to subjugate living systems in the earth, and human beings, and all other types of life as well, not just human beings. We'll talk about, you know, violence and nonviolence as it relates to humans. Okay, so in the cosmology that I've learned from my elders, well, let me just give you an example. So the Yakima people, which are not my people, but I lived among the Yakima on the Yakima Reservation in Central Washington for 18 years. And they say this is kind of a proverb. The hunter knows that when he goes out to seek his prey, that it's his brother that's waiting for him. Okay, that is to say, when the hunter goes to kill prey in order to eat that food, to nourish that hunter's body and the body of the community, that's actually a relative that you're eating, and that relative is offering itself to you, right? We are connected. So it's not like, oh, it's a dog eat dog world. There's predators and prey, and the prey are just too bad. You guys are prey, right? This is a different sort of logic or understanding that actually they're kin, and we're in a symbiotic relationship together. Okay, so I'm gonna extend that thought a bit further to say that what I've learned from my Tewa elders is that when you encounter your enemy is your brother. In fact, actually, if you take that a step further in our cosmology, when you encounter your enemy is yourself. So I'm not saying actually this is some kind of a, I'm not trying to make this sort of a existential conversation. What I'm trying to say is when you harm your enemy, when you bring violence to your enemy, you are bringing violence to yourself. Anytime you're bringing harm upon your own head. Why? That's not sort of abstract concept for us. Because when you are bringing harm, when you're intrinsically interconnected with all of these systems, including human systems, when there is harm, that harm is absolutely shared by every other living organism in the system. So Sophie Pierre, who's an indigenous leader in BC, British Columbia, in Canada, says that when there is a competition with a winner and a loser, that winning and losing is encapsulated in a very short period of time. And if you step outside the box of that limited time, there is only losing. Because if someone is losing, everyone is losing. Why? Because we're interconnected. So I want to take on this idea of nonviolence from an indigenous grounding in an assumption of interdependence. My liberation is dependent on your liberation. As long as I am not free, you are not free. It's not a beautiful sentiment. It is a fundamental, absolute truth of existence. That when I am enslaved, even if you're the beneficiaries of systems of injustice, we're both enslaved by those systems as long as I'm enslaved. Why is that? Because detriment to me is detriment to you. So I want to talk about nonviolent resistance in terms of indigenous land and water protectors. Indigenous land and water protectors are putting their bodies in the way of violent systems to protect sacred waters and lands from processes of extraction. Okay. I find that to be so interesting that some of the most vulnerable people on the earth are the ones that are doing that. And the beneficiaries of these systems, those of us who are settler descendant or Christian descendant, because they're, the hegemony that we face now, these systems are really rooted in Christian thought originally, or at least in Christian justification, and systems like the doctrine of discovery, which I'll go into in a minute. One may be the descendant of Christians or of settlers and be a beneficiary of systems of harm, but those harms ultimately will harm everyone, right? Because when you are commodifying the systems that all of us depend on to live, everyone pays the price for that. And in fact, not just human beings, but all living systems pay for that, right? So we find ourselves today in a situation where we have, every life support system on the earth is in decline. And it's not just in decline for indigenous people, it's in decline for everyone, right? And so these life support systems are in decline for everyone. So, and yet indigenous land and water protectors are putting their lives and bodies in harm's way and to protect these living systems for everyone. I know you heard from Tim Nafziger before, who is an activist working at Oak Flat. Our coalition, the Coalition to Dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery, has partnered with folks at Oak Flat, Apache Stronghold, really since 2015. And so, and Tim is part of that work too, and as am I. And those land and water protectors are putting their life energy on the line and their safety on the line to protect the sacred place of Oak Flat, not for the Apache alone, not for the San Carlos Apache, but for all of humanity. They're really open about that. The balance of reality depends on these systems being here. And to strip the world of them is detrimental to us all. That's not even talking about the millions and then billions of gallons of water pulled off the Colorado River that Phoenix and Tucson depend on. Those gallons of that water that's going to be pulled off this river in a very fragile environment that human communities depend on, what we're going to use to extract or and at the same time reduce this mountain to a crater that's a mile across and 10 stories deep. And I want to point out there that this copper, the justification for this, of course, the fast tracking of extraction really was put into play by the Biden administration. So people say, oh, this administration's so rough. Well, I want to point out that the Biden administration fast tracked so much extraction on indigenous people's lands for the purpose of national security, that is to fuel the green economy. Okay, because we have too many cars, we've decided what we really need is to produce twice as many cars. We're just going to make them electric instead of gas engines. And so to do that, we're going to sacrifice indigenous people's lands and resources at Oak Flat, at Thacker Pass, et cetera. And indigenous land and water protectors are putting ourselves, our bodies in harm's way to protect these resources in active nonviolence. Why? Because of an inherent assumption, I'll speak for myself on my part, that we are inherently and intrinsically connected. and that detriment for me is detriment to you. I'm going to stand side by side with my brothers and sisters at Oak Flat, because annihilation for the San Carlos Apache is annihilation for me. Annihilation for the Colorado River is annihilation for me, right? Okay, so I want to talk for a little bit now about the policy structures that we face that are causing violence in a concrete way. And I'm going to talk about this from the perspective of indigenous people. So begin by really talking about what the doctrine of discovery is. Have you heard of this, the doctrine of Christian discovery? I'm not going to go down in the weeds. It sounds really boring. I'm going to tell you it's a law and policy structure that was adopted by the Supreme Court of the United States in 1823. It is the prevailing paradigm for land tenure law today in the United States and around the world. It's the law today. So I'm going to give you an example of what the doctrine of discovery is like. We say it's a paradigm for making law and policy. And so if that sounds like too abstract to you, another paradigm for making law and policy is the doctrine of segregation. Okay, or another one. Here's another one that may be familiar to you: the legal doctrine of slavery. You know that the doctrine of discovery got its name from the Supreme Court, right? The Supreme Court, the US Supreme Court called it the discovery doctrine. And that discovery doctrine says that the first European nation, the first Christian nation to step foot on a land and to claim it, has absolute sovereignty over that land. And the people that are already there, the indigenous people, have the right to occupancy at the pleasure of whoever the sovereign is. Okay, so if that people were not ruled by a Christian monarch, then they're not considered to be full human beings. So this discovery doctrine is the basis for our national boundaries in the world today. Terra nullius, which is this Latin term that means empty land. Land is empty of human beings if it's not governed by a Christian monarch, is a valid basis for inclusion in the United Nations. I want to make that really clear, which is why I'm not disputing the rightness or the wrongness of this. I'm just using it as an example. Israel is a state acknowledged by the United Nations, and Palestine is not. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen with you. And we're just going to look at one slide quickly. We're going to look at one slide. And I want to talk about some legal and policy eras in the United States as it's pertained to indigenous people, just to kind of give you a framework. The doctrine of discovery is a logic that says that the most powerful empire the world has ever known has as a policy agenda to remove indigenous people from the surface of the earth. And over eras of time, they've used different tactics to do this, beginning with the extermination era. The extermination era is the era of just trying to kill every indigenous person that they can. When that became too difficult, there's just too many indigenous people. The next era is the removal era. So removing all indigenous people from the east, where colonization is taking place, to west of the Mississippi. So the logic there is that this is Andrew Jackson, President Andrew Jackson. His logic is simply that, well, we'll just push them over there because where we're making our nation is really over here. That only lasted about 30 years. Once there was a desire, especially after the Civil War, to spread all the way to the West Coast, for settlement to go all the way to the West Coast. Then there was this idea of creating homelands for different tribes and nations to be put onto small tracts of land as a matter of peace treaty or treaty. And so those lands are guaranteed by treaty forever. They say as long as the rivers run and the grass grows to these indigenous nations. And that reservation era also lasted less than 30 years. The next era is allotment. This is when the federal government said, well, gosh, those native people have all that land and they're not doing anything with it because we don't see them farming. So what we're going to do is we're going to break up that land into allotments. In some reservations, 40 acres per person. Others, it's 80 acres per person. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put them on those acres so that they will stop sharing things in common. And then whatever is surplus, once everybody has their plot of land, whatever's in surplus, the federal government sold to settlers, which is why reservations in the United States are primarily owned by non-Indigenous people. And this was done in what's called a checkerboard pattern, where every other parcel was granted to a settler to break up the contiguous lands of Indigenous people. Okay, this is the same era as the boarding school era. So the boarding school era is the incarceration of Indigenous children to concentration camps where they were separated from their parents for their entire childhood. This era went through the 1970s in the United States, and I think through the 60s in Canada. Termination is the next policy era. This era began in 1953 when the federal government said we no longer acknowledge any treaty with any Indigenous people. We no longer have Indigenous peoples in the United States. Fast on the heels of this era is relocation, where Indigenous peoples on reservations were told that they were expected to migrate to urban areas, places like Denver and Spokane and Los Angeles, Detroit, and other cities. And they were told, if you go to an urban area, you will be given $5,000 in education and a job. Often Indigenous peoples went with a bus ticket, and when they arrived, there was nothing there. Certainly no job or educational opportunities. More than 70% of us live in urban areas now in this country. The current era is the extraction era. So our lands have shrunk to just a fraction of their original size if you're just looking at reservations. And those lands that are still held in trust for us by the federal government are still under extraction by a federal government that has been working for centuries to erase us and eradicate us from the face of the planet. Okay. So this is kind of a depressing place to stop, but I don't want to stop there. I'm going to talk about decolonization, our coalition to dismantle the doctrine of discovery. Our primary position, what we do in the world is work on decolonization. We define decolonization as the relinquishment of a subjugated people. That means those people who are subjugated by systems of violence must be released. So this is kind of a quandary, isn't it? How do you release a subjugated people? So let's talk about segregation for a moment. If you wanted for people to no longer be subjugated by segregation, what had to happen? Was participating in a book group, was that enough to bring segregation to an end? Did that bring segregation to an end? How about liking stuff on Facebook? Did that bring segregation to an end? No, the law had to change. The law had to change, right? Actually, constitutional amendment. Same with slavery. You know, sometimes I hear people say, we're going to have liberation for Indigenous people when Indigenous people lead the liberation. And I don't disagree. Indigenous people must lead this movement for liberation. There are many movements for Indigenous liberation. But I want to ask you this. Do you think slavery would have come to an end if it were Black slaves that made it happen? Why were Black slaves not able to end slavery? Well, because they were enslaved, right? It requires the participation of every single member of a society, or at least hundreds of thousands, and then millions, and then hundreds of millions of people to engage in resistance to violent structures and to participate in movements for liberation, because It takes that many of us to actually change the law in a significant way. And that's what's required to bring an end to the doctrine of discovery. We have to change the law. The doctrine of discovery is the systems of laws and policies that are in place today. And we in the Coalition to Dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery seek to dismantle those with a posture of decolonization. So I'm going to talk just one more little piece about decolonization. If we want to release a subjugated people, if we want to relinquish control of a people subjugated, that requires that those people who are the beneficiaries of injustice give up power. If we want to balance power, that means those people who have power now have to give it up. We often think about that somebody else. That's somebody else. That's not us. That's not me. I'm not somebody who holds power. But if you're a beneficiary of systems of injustice, unless you are actively trying to dismantle those systems, then you are somebody holding power over those people who are subjugated. I'm going to just give you one more definition to chew on, and this is structural violence. Have you heard of this term before? Structural violence. This is violence that's baked into the law. I keep talking about the law because the law is the rules of reality, right? The law defines what you can and can't do. Just because it's legal doesn't mean that it's just. Yeah. So structural violence, we define that as when there are structures that prevent vulnerable people, in this case, indigenous people, from meeting our own needs. We know very well how to meet our own needs, and we're prevented from doing that because of these structures. So I'm going to give you an example of my own people. A huge portion of our land was taken by executive order so that the United States could create the atom bomb during World War II. Just a detail about that. This is Los Alamos labs are on our homelands. Those were just taken by executive order, never returned. But here's a detail about that that you may not have heard of, but you should look it up. Definitely don't take my word for it. Before a bomb was detonated on foreign soil, these bombs were detonated 11 times on my homeland to see what would happen before they were ever detonated on foreign shores. Do you think that had an impact on our soils and water? We're living with that. But even to this day, those lands are policed and the military controls them. We may know very well what we want to do to remediate that land, but we're prevented from doing it as a matter of law, right? Because the federal government holds those lands, not we, even though they were lands guaranteed to us by treaty. I'll give you one other example. This one may hit a little closer to home. Among the Yakaba people of Central Washington, where I lived, as I told you, for 18 years, the center of community life, the absolute center of this civilization. I want to be clear about that. Civilization. Settler colonialism is this process where a foreign nation comes in, plops itself on top of a civilization that already exists, then denies the existence of this civilization, pretends it's not there, or tries to discredit it as being primitive. And so the civilization that existed of the Salish people in Central Washington, or Washington in general, these are a salmon people, and the center of the economy is the salmon run, salmon trade. The center of spiritual life is here in the same conjunction on the Columbia. The center of community life, the center of governance, where the tribes come together to meet in the winter in order to make treaties with each other. It's all in the same place on the Columbia River. And so Lilo Falls, the most important center of this place, the twin towers of these people's existence, was dammed to generate electric power for Washington State and replaced by nothing. So the entire economy was destroyed. And any any action that indigenous people in this region have made in order to seek a different economy is mocked and criticized. So a lot of people ask me, in fact, it's the most common question people ask me, Sarah, what do you think about casinos? Don't you think it's unjust that indigenous people have casinos? To which I say, when your entire economy has been stripped of you and all you're allowed to practice is capitalism, everyone else is rewarded for engaging in capitalism, but when you engage in capitalism, it is criticized. How does that work? You want to know who else has casinos? Well, I don't want to name names. Okay, well, we're right at time, and I'll leave it at that. Looking forward to discussion together.
Thank you so much, Sarah. We have both the chat, and also you can digitally raise your hand if you would like to participate here. Questions are really welcome while we have Sarah here. Also, she is, open to discussion and your thoughts. I did want to get us started. Now, the doctrine of discovery, I have thought of it as rooted in religious doctrine. Is that true too? It's not the Catholic Church.
So I'm not going to disagree with that. There are all kinds of indigenous people who have written about that and talked about that. I certainly have too. But what I want to center for you today is that it was actually a political body, the Holy Roman Empire, who enacted the doctrine of discovery, and that doctrine was adopted by governments the world around. So when you keep this in mind, when the United States Supreme Court adopted the doctrine of discovery and built it into our legal structure, they're not a Catholic nation at that time. Do you see what I'm saying? They didn't do this for reasons of Christianity. They did it for reasons of it was a political reason, which is to say, we want to have complete sovereignty over this land, so we're going to follow the rules that were set out by the Holy Roman Empire, the Catholic Church. Does that make sense? And so, and I could break down for you, but I won't. Someday, if you want me to, the theology that kind of has justified why this is okay and the way it continues to proliferate in Christian theology. But really, at the end of the day, it wouldn't matter if the Catholic Church today said, oh, we disavow all that. The Catholic Church is no longer the ruler of the world. The hegemony is now springing from secular political systems. And so we have to understand that it's embedded in those systems. And I'm going to say, speaking from the position of the Coalition to Dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery, Christian institutions who have been primary beneficiaries of this land theft and the oppression of indigenous people, and Christian people who are the primary beneficiaries of these systems of destruction, we're calling on Christians to join us in dismantling these systems, because it really requires the beneficiaries to stop and say no more.
Thank you. That is very helpful, very illuminating. Let me also bring forward, so you talked about Biden. Okay, Debbie, you're next up after. Okay, you talked about Biden being involved in the extraction. Essentially, this is not a partisan issue. That changing from one party to the other isn't necessarily helping us. And we find this with so many of the issues we care about. Militarism is like the only thing, well, maybe not the only, but it is a major thing that the Democrats and Republicans seem to agree on. And this is shifting a little bit in terms of the work we're doing on Palestine, but it has been, again, a bipartisan agreement. I wonder if you have more to say about that. And yeah.
So I want to suggest that extraction is a paradigm of thought. You can put any kind of, you can paste over the top of that logic a political ideology, a religious ideology, and it's designed to do the same thing, which is to reduce things to their parts, to separate things that are actually systematic, and to try and identify the monetary value of living systems. So if you say, we want to save the environment and we want to stop climate change because we know carbon is going to the air and we want to stop that, but you use extractive logic to stop it, all you're doing is damaging a different system. So for example, they're saying, well, we want to stop putting carbon in the air. Okay, so to do that, we're going to create electric cars, which is still rooted in the idea of capitalism, right? So what we need to do is, they're saying the new white gold is lithium. Lithium is due, I think in the next 10 years, this is from the Guardian magazine article. Don't listen to me, you should look it up. It's anticipated that the lithium market, the global market, is going to triple in the United States alone in the next 10 years. So lithium is now at, there's a gold rush on lithium, and guess where lithium is? On the lands of indigenous peoples, like on Thacker Pass. And so all of the political apparatus of all the parties are saying, yeah, we got to extract that with a quickness. We're going to do it. Consequences be damned, right? And land and water protectors are saying, no, we're going to put our bodies in the way. We don't want that extraction to happen. But the full power of the law is against us. But keep in mind what I was saying in the first part of what I was talking about here. The damage to these vital lands and territories is detrimental to us all. The toxic waste that goes into the earth in this extractive process is harmful to everyone. I foresee, this is just me. I speak only for myself. When we push poison into the earth to extract, I'm thinking especially of at Oak Flat, and we're using vital resources to do that, water in the desert. The direct consequence for me is uninhabitable zones in a generation or two, entire regions of the country, of the continent that cannot be lit, where no one can live. That's a consequence for everyone. So there may be short-term winning, a short-term monetary gain, but in the long term, it's destructive to the systems that we all depend on to live.
Thank you. Debbie, I'm going to put you on mute.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Sarah. We've met once before. It's been a while, and I look terrible is the reason my camera's off. I had a broken foot this week, and I just, I look terrible.
I'm sorry.
You told Amy that you would break things down if she wanted that. Now, what you said after that, was that the breaking down?
Because no, I could go for 2 hours just about Christian theology. And we just don't have the time for that this evening. Yeah.
How I have not read your second book yet, I confess. Would it be in there?
I would say Breaking Down the Christian Theology was really in The Land Is Not Empty. That book was really designed to sort of break down sort of the three primary, three-legged stool of the justification for colonization, which would be the covenant, the new covenant with the Christian church. I'm not saying this is true. I'm saying this is a Christian theology. Right. So the covenant, covenantal people in the Exodus story, which enabled Christians to believe they could do that same thing, come to all these lands and exterminate all the people, just like in the story in the Bible about the land of Canaan.
Right.
That's one part of it. Another part of it is divine mandate, which is in Romans chapter 13, which really where Paul defines that all the authorities of earth are put into place by God, and to resist those authorities is to resist the will of God. So the colonizers that came to North America, South America, in the requirement actually read a statement explaining just that. We come in the name of God, and if you resist us, we're going to kill you in the name of God. So that Romans chapter 13 is divine mandate. And the third piece of that then is the Great Commission, where Jesus says to his disciples, he shares his authority and says, you can bring this good news unto all lands and all peoples. And that was used as a justification to go to all of these lands and exterminate a bunch of people in the name of conversion. So those are kind of three major theological ideas, and I could go on and on about that. But that's very much explored in The Land Is Not Empty. I
have a small group of Presbyterian women have read that together, and we discussed it, and they need to reread it because there's so much. You know what? I never, ever thought about the reason that Palestine is not in the United Nations is because of not having, how did you put it?
Well, they don't have rights under terra nullius. So terra nullius says anybody that's not, doesn't have sovereignty according to these laws of discovery has no claim. They could have the claim to occupancy, but only that. Okay. That's international law, actually, that the UN abides by.
That's so depressing.
Well, it's what is, and it will change when we change it. Because I want to just say really clearly, the systems we have in place were made by human beings. They are not more clever than us. They are not more creative than us. This is our moment. And we can imagine and create together other systems. And we must do that. We must do that.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to bring up from the chat, Mohammed had a question. Do you think that is why, so do you think the reason why the Western governments are defending Israel is in order to defend the doctrine of discovery?
I can only give you my point of view. I can't really even speak for my coalition and say that I can't actually say why Western societies are defending Israel. But what Israel is doing is following a pattern of settler colonialism that has gone across the globe. And so that is to say a civilization that comes into a place that's already, where there is already a civilization and then denies the existence of the original people there, or downgrades what they are, denies that it is a civilization. And so, I have all kinds of opinions about why Western countries are doing that. But what I'm saying is that Israel is following the rules of discovery. And for that reason is that's legal. Discovery is legal is what I'm trying to say. It's built into the legal system here in the United States and around the world.
Thank you. There was one more in the chat before I get to Moji. Kevin was wondering, leaders often make an argument for destruction of indigenous land that it is for a greater good because it is for the purpose of solving another issue. And how would you essentially help us or articulate an argument against that greater good?
Yeah, so that's exactly. Excuse me. I'm going to be dramatic now. So if you don't like that, close your ears now. That is exactly the logic of every state justifying using power to diminish and crush the vulnerable. So in South Africa, during apartheid, crushing the original people of that land was justified as the greater good and the pursuit of progress in civilization. In Europe, in Germany and Poland, the eradication of an entire race of people was justified in the name of progress. Extracting resources on indigenous people's land is the same as destroying indigenous people. It is our destruction, and I could go on and on to explain this to you. And indigenous people in the United States have a life expectancy 20 years less than someone from the dominant culture. We have the highest rate of infant mortality at a factor of 2 of folks in the dominant culture. That means twice as many of our children die per capita as infants as folks in the dominant culture. We have the highest incarceration rate by race. We have the harshest sentencing by race. We have the lowest home ownership. We have the lowest graduation rate. And across any dimension you want to measure human thriving, indigenous people are the lowest, because there are laws and policies in place to ensure that we are subjugated. Why is that? Because our lands are owned by somebody else. So those people in the dominant culture, when somebody wants to put a railroad through your home, you at least get compensation or redress for the loss of that home, right? We call that eminent domain. Indigenous peoples, all of our resources are owned by the federal government, and we're allowed to exist at their pleasure. That is if that's not subjugation, I don't know what is. Our children are taken from us at a rate higher than any other group of people in the nation. We do not have the right to control our own lives. If you believe that's for the greater good, I don't know what to say. So I'm gonna put this fine note on it. Anthropologists and geographers believe that there were 100 million of us before the first European ships hit our shores with armies. By 1900, there were 4 million of us. That is a reduction of 96%. If that's not annihilation, I don't know what you call that. That has been passed off as in the name of God and in the name of progress. In fact, Chief Justice John Marshall, when he wrote the majority decision that incorporated the doctrine of discovery into our legal system in 1823, said that indigenous people were justly compensated. He called us Indians. He said the Indians have been justly compensated because what did they receive? Civilization and Christianity. So it's the greater good, right? The greater good, because we get to have all this progress and so on. As long as the greater good denies this fact that we are interdependent in a closed system, this logic of extraction, when the logic of extraction is the thing that's being used, it doesn't matter what the good thing is that you're promoting, you are absolutely destroying, you are uncreating, you are destroying the possibility for our life support systems to thrive. So this green economy, in the name of a higher good, is destroying our life support systems on this earth, not just for indigenous people, but it is indigenous people that are trying to defend these systems. And I encourage you to join us.
Thank you, Sarah, for that beautiful and honest answer. Moji, we don't have much time, but I'm going to have you unmute and.
Thank you.
Hi, Moji.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for what you're doing. I am, as you know, I am from the other side of the planet and experiencing basically the same thing. And I wanted to ask you to reflect and say what may occur to you. That again, I'm from Iran, that has a government or a regime that claims to be the government of God on earth. Mm. And I have an in absentia execution order as a Sufi, as well as a person that says, no, you're not a government of God on earth. And I have an execution order for the crime of warring against God. Mm. So I want to, think about, hear what you say about the doctrine of discovery and other horrors and and abuses in the name of religion, regardless of what religion, are abuses of religion by political and economic and selfish forces. And to me, that's helpful every time I get angry at what the US has done to Iran and
Yes.
the results of which we are experiencing today, the overthrow of the Gandhi of Iran, the Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953. What helps me is to recognize that as I am seeing the abuse of Islam in Iran today, we have been, this continent and the so-called civilized Europe has been abusing Christianity, and the, you know, like Netanyahu is abusing Judaism, and Modi in India is abusing Hinduism and whatnot. So it's an abuse of religion that we are struggling against, not the religion itself. So tell me what you think about what I said.
Thank
And
you, Moji.
thank you for what you're doing, Sister Sarah.
Thank you, Moji. I so appreciate that. And what I try to do is to ground myself in the cosmology of my people, which acknowledges reality as it is, not all this noise that is meant to hypnotize us to believe something that's absolutely false. We can't go on. These systems can't go on the way they have been because they're destroying the world and our ability to thrive here. So, what is the cosmology that I ground myself in? That we are we live in a closed system of mutual dependence, and my enemy is my brother. To harm my enemy is to harm myself. So even in the sense of wanting to destroy the other, I know in our cosmology that what shifts the world, what actually makes it possible to alter reality, is for us to join together in acknowledgement of the truth as it is, which is to say we are dependent on each other. We are dependent on these life support systems, and we have to choose systems of life. So it's not about just saying what we're against, but saying what we're for. We are for the joyful and life-giving accompaniment of life support systems and following the logic of those life support systems, which is to say, we are mutually dependent. Our people say, or I've been taught by my elders to say that when we breathe together, which we did together, even though we're in virtual space here, that's a kind of ceremony. We're sharing breath together. And that act itself is sacred. What a gift to be alive. What a gift to be alive at this time of this turning. Some of us say, oh, it's a terrible time. It's such a scary time and a dark time. But we are the ones that must rise up. What a moment for us to be in. We are the ones that have to imagine and shape what comes next. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And I'm going to move us to closing here. I appreciate so much that you came and shared this with us. A lot of our programs are pretty action-oriented, but we also always want to be challenging ourselves to look at the larger picture and the depth of what's going on, and trying to get to the root and the heart of the matter, so that, as you said, we can be creating the change that is really, really needed, creating the new world from the one crashing down around us. And Sarah, I think you have, yes, good. Sarah's put dismantlediscovery.org in the chat. I'm going to put some other things too, but that is where you can see the work that they are doing, how they are moving this forward to make change that benefits all of us. Okay, I have a few more things. I first want to remind folks the series is free and open to everyone. That said, we very much appreciate donations. nhpsection.org/donate. We also want you to stay in touch with us to learn more about what we're working on and events we're planning. I have a few things I'm going to highlight right now. Our ceasefire and just peace vigils continue Wednesday, October 8th from 2 to 3. We'll be up the street from Representative Chris Pappas's office in Dover. Thursday, October 9, noon to 1. Folks will be at City Plaza in Concord. And then Wednesday, October 15th, 2 to 3, we are outside Senator Shaheen's office in Dover. Other programs, here's an in-person one coming up on Saturday, October 1st, 1 to 5:30 p.m. It's a Work That Reconnects workshop held in Stratham, New Hampshire. This is a set of practices developed by Joanna Macy to support and re-energize folks who are working to create change in the world. It's going to be led by Kendra Ford of 350 New Hampshire and me. On Wednesday, October 15th, 7 to 8:30, we'll have an online presentation for divestment as a tool for change with Noam Perry from AFSC. This is delving into getting more involved in this act of withdrawing financial support or investment from entities, industries, or countries causing harm or injustice, such as apartheid in Palestine and Israel, U.S. prison systems, surveillance industries. Our next Peace and Justice conversation via Zoom is on Monday, October 20th, starting at 7 p.m., and it is Riding Against War on Gaza from California to New Hampshire with Bob Sanders. I also want to mention that there's an event being hosted by an organization we work closely with, Not in My Name, New Hampshire. They are gathering tomorrow, Tuesday, October 7th at 7 p.m. to hear a presentation about a book called Tracing Homelands, Israel, Palestine, and the Claims of Belonging. The author, Linda Dittmar, will be present. This is at the Kittery, Maine Community Center. Linda is a scholar, professor, and author, and her book is Raw and Courageous. And we do want to say that, especially given the anniversary it falls on, we know that while they delve into this emotional topic, they will be doing so with care and compassion as they do for all the work that they're engaged in. So with all of that said, I just want to ask you all to, visible, since we're not in the same audio space, visibly thank Sarah for taking this time, for bringing us this perspective, for giving us something to think about always, but also as we move towards Indigenous Peoples' Days and look at this, what really still needs to be done. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone.